Good morning, good day, good evening. Today we have the Stellar Cyber and Forrester webcast featuring Joseph Blankenship. He's going to guide us on his journey and analysis to the intelligence SOC. Could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm Joseph Blankenship, Vice President and Research Director, affectionately known as JB, here at Forrester, covering security and risk topics like security operations, security analytics, SIEM, et cetera. So really happy to be here.
Thanks, JB.
Excellent. Well, thank everyone for showing up. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, right? Kind of how do we transform the SOC? Sort of the journey that we've been on to go from very manual type work to much more automated, much more intelligence driven kind of work. And this is like a movie poster from the Journey to the Center of the Earth with Brendan Fraser, I guess, based on the Jules Verne novel. So while we don't have any T-Rexes or creatures or caves or anything of that sort here, we are going to be talking about the evolution of how we do SecOps in our environments. Now, you think about the evolution of storytelling, right? So, many, hundreds of thousands of years ago, folks, cavemen, figured out how to paint on the walls of caves, with their fingers, with apparatus, what have you. Then we moved on to stone tablets, and eventually started writing on papyrus using a pen. We learned how to use a typewriter. Hopefully, you didn't learn on that Underwood typewriter. If you learned how to type on a typewriter like I did, that's how old I am. I've been around long enough to at least use a IBM Selectric and not the Underwood here. And then eventually we've moved on to, we create our content on computers. Now the thing is though, see next slide. The thing is though, a lot of our SOC processes are still very manual. We're still in the stone tablet kind of an era. Thankfully, we're not in the cave drawing kind of an era, but we're doing a lot of things very manually. We have a lot of tools that we bring to bear to do SecOps kinds of stuff. And this is a really inefficient way to tell our story in the SOC. It's a really inefficient way to do detection. It's an inefficient way to do investigation. And it's definitely an inefficient way to do remediation and response. So what we've got to do is get a lot better at doing this work. The other problem we have, besides the fact that we're using stone tablets, is we're also swivel chairing. We swivel chair between all these different tools that we have. And a lot of analysts that you talk to, they're actually proud of their ability to move from tool to tool, console to console. And they will tell you about that. But at the same time, this is a very interrupt-driven sort of a way to do anything. So it's very inefficient. It also requires your analysts to learn all these different consoles. They're not going to one place and having that be the source of truth for what they're doing in their jobs. Find that the #1 productivity tool in cybersecurity is Excel. And as we were getting ready for this presentation, we're all kind of joking. That's actually sort of true of a lot of business processes. At the end of the day, everything is driven off of some Excel spreadsheet someplace. But what does this really do? What does it really mean? What it really means, what we're doing is we're doing a lot of that correlation of data manually, and we're using Excel as the tool to do it. And you've probably all done a lot of data analysis, or so-called data analysis, right, with air quotes, using Excel, and you know how inefficient it is and how prone to human error that is, as opposed to being able to do that in an automated way or using analytics tools. And so if we're kind of talking about the inefficiency of our security operations, what does that actually mean to us, right? Well, how does that affect our results? Well, according to the mandated M-Trends report in 2020, it takes us about 56 days on average to identify a data breach. Now, what they want to point out is that's drastically down from where it was just a couple of years ago, where we were 100+ days. But still, I think we could all agree that almost 2 months of time for an attacker to be active in an environment is a heck of a lot of time, and it can do a lot of damage in that amount of time. And at Forrester, we're at heart, we're a research company, right? So one of the things we do every year is to do a big research study of security professionals just like yourselves. And we ask those security professionals what their experience is. We ask them things about, like, did you experience a data breach in the previous 12 months? And in our most recent survey, about 52% of our respondents said, yes, we did. We did experience a data breach, and some of those were multiple data breaches. You can kind of see the breakdown here: external attacks, internal incidents, sort of the insider threat, insider risk sort of a thing, as well as third parties. We also asked CISOs what their biggest security challenges are. And this is one that's really fascinating for me, because the top one or two for the last few years has been the same, it's been consistent, where the complexity of their own environment ends up being one of the biggest security challenges. You think about it, we're adding assets to networks, we're adding cloud environments, we're adding SaaS vendors, we're adding all kinds of complexity that the security team ends up being responsible for monitoring and responding to. Now, then you add that with the next one here, the changing and evolving nature of IT threats. So that's the external environment that we have no control of. So we have complexity internally. We also have a changing threat environment. The way that attackers come at us, changes, based on, new attacks, what the assets are, what the security looks like, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes really challenging because you've got two things that are, very complex that you're trying to respond to. You look down a few lines and you see day-to-day tactical activities taking up too much time. That means that we're doing those stone tablet kind of things. We're doing a lot of minutia, a lot of labor-intensive work, and not necessarily handing things over, to automation. Now, that increasing complexity actually requires the use of automation. So if you look at this chart here, right, manual ability is linear, right? So we can keep throwing people at the problem, which is historically what we've done in security. We look at it as a people problem. Hey, we need really smart people. We're going to put them in a security operations center, whatever that looks like. If it's a big room with screens, or if it's people spread all over, whatever that looks like in your enterprise. But what we end up with that complexity is we end up with an automation gap, and that's what that is there in green, right? Because you can see the complexity going up, algorithmically here, on the curve, and we can't get there with just people. We actually need better tools to go and be able to respond to the complex environment, to respond to that changing and evolving threat environment, et cetera. Now, there's several problems we can all identify in our security operations. And I love to use this analogy of Lucy and Ethel here. And again, I'm showing my age, right? Because they used to run this on reruns when I was a kid. So if you've never seen I Love Lucy, you're not familiar with it, I definitely recommend looking that up on YouTube or what have you. But sort of what's happening here is Lucy on the right and Ethel on the left are working in a candy factory. And they think that this is going to be the greatest job ever because they both like candy. Like, sort of after Halloween, I think we're all probably a little sick of candy at the moment. Well, these two actually get sick of candy as well. Because what happens is they're supposed to be wrapping the chocolates as they come down this conveyor. They're supposed to wrap them up and put them in a box. And they start coming out so fast, they can't keep up. So they start trying to eat the chocolates. You can see Lucy here trying to shove chocolates in her blouse. They just can't keep up. And it's sort of the same analogy in the SOC, right? We hear about alert queues, and we're only working certain alerts based on some sort of criticality we've assigned them, and we leave a lot of them not to be worked. So it's sort of like the same thing as the candy conveyor. A lot of the alerts end up on the floor, just like the candies. The other problem, so we're trying to throwing people at this problem, and we can't find the people. There's a whole argument we can make about whether or not there is a cybersecurity skill shortage and what is causing that skill shortage. But never mind that. Let's just face it. We can't hire and retain enough people in security operations to catch up with all those alerts that we talked about in number one. And we've got a lot of security tools. Snehal, you were kind of like talking about all the different ways that you bring in data into your platform from all these different tool sets, and I think we even had a question here in the chat about bringing in data from different tool sets. This is another problem we have in security. We've got all of these things. I show this to people who are not in security and say this is why this is complex, right? Because if you talk to a lot of fairly large enterprises, they may have between 30 and 50 different vendors solving 30 to 50 different problems. And that requires that someone has got to understand how to manage that tool. Someone's got to understand how to log into the console and make use of the data coming from the console. And then when we're doing our response, chances are we're actually pivoting into one of these tools to go do one of our response actions. So that we're losing time every time that we do that. The other one that we have a problem with is so much data and so little insight. Snehal, you were talking about this as well a bit in your presentation, right? You're bringing in all of this data, and you're trying to provide insight to it. Well, one of the ways that people are approaching this right now is they may have multiple systems. They may have a data lake where they're going to put everything in. We're going to put all of our telemetry in this data lake, and then one day we're going to build some analytics or buy some analytics or do something so we can go examine this data and do threat hunting and query across it and all that kind of stuff. And chances are that may never come to pass. Instead, what we end up with is a really expensive sort of science experiment. The other thing that may happen is we're putting all this data into the data lake. We do have the ability to query it and reference it, but at the same time, we're not really able to get to all of it. We're not really prioritizing the data that's important. Instead, what we end up with is a bunch of garbage data that is not important and is taking up space. It actually could end up being a risk based on the data that could be in there. So not really getting the insight that we want from the investment that we're making in these data lakes and these data analysis tools. And then the last problem here is that lack of automation. Now, for the longest time in security, and you can probably guess, I've already talked about how old I am with Lucille Ball and Underwood typewriters and what have you. I did not learn how to write on papyrus, which is a good thing, I guess. But for the longest time in security, automation has been sort of a dirty word. It's been a four-letter word, if you will, because people didn't want to automate things, because we looked at it as, hey, we need really smart security people doing really smart security things. And what we figured out, and I've talked about it, at length, is that that's a really inefficient way to solve the problem. And we put lots of inefficiency and lag into our systems by doing that. So it's, beyond time that security pros start embracing automation and sort of embracing machine intelligence to get smarter about the way that we approach security. And the net of it is, we need a new set of tools. We don't need this rusty set of tools over here on the right with a broken saw and this kind of thing. We actually need a new set of tools. The way we've been trying to solve this problem historically is with things like rule-based SIEMs, and those weren't really proven very effective. As a matter of fact, I spent a lot of my time talking to clients that are frustrated with their rules-based SIEMs and are looking for a better approach. They're looking for that next set of tools. They're difficult to maintain, and they only find known threats. As well as, we end up doing a lot of the correlation because the correlation doesn't work in those SIEMs using things like Excel. Now, one of the things that we do here at Forrester is we don't actually cover that legacy SIEM market. And the reason we don't cover that legacy SIEM market is because we deemed it years ago not to be effective, not to be an approach that we could really stand behind and recommend. And so instead, many years ago, we looked at this and said, what are the tools that we really need to bring together, right? If we really want to do this detection and response and investigation process better. And we're going to bring together things like SIEM, right? Because SIEM actually does some use cases, okay, fairly well, right? And then we're going to combine that with things like user behavior analytics. Remember, UBA was originally sort of launched as being like a SIEM helper, right? We're going to, kind of add this ML stack on top of the SIEM to help us make use of data. Now we're really seeing those combine. We're going to use things like network telemetry, which we cover as network analysis and visibility tools, and that's all the flow data, network metadata, et cetera, that we can bring in and really kind of get an idea of what's going on in a network and really understand behaviors and relationships in a network. So we're going to bring all those things together. We're also going to add automation and orchestration. And the difference between those things is orchestration is kind of the set of tasks that you do in SecOps, and then automation is automating those tasks at different points along the process. Right, so you orchestrate the process and then you automate the actions, and that helps us to be more efficient with the way we approach security. And then that was only like slightly successful. And what we really had to do was really embrace, kind of a big data approach to this, not a relational database approach, which the legacy SIEM stuff was kind of based on. We had to bring in things like, machine learning to help us look at behavioral detections. And then we started adding automation and orchestration. So we've gotten into this era of intelligent operations where we have orchestrated security. We're making intelligent decisions about what the data is showing us. And then based on those intelligent decisions, now we're able to automate process and go and respond to threats as they're coming in. And one of the things that's also happened at the same time is we've adopted things like cloud delivery for all of this, for the scalability, the elasticity, et cetera, because of the massive amount of data that we're now bringing in and analyzing. One of the things that we're looking to do with all of this, this technology, with the improved analytics, the improved intelligence, and the automation, is we want to create an experience where we're making the human analyst smarter and really focusing their ability to go and do the tasks that really require a security analyst intelligence. Right, we want to move them away from things like doing lookups, doing manual correlations, et cetera. And if we do that, if we bring that data together and we present it, or we're making intelligent machine-driven decisions, we are going to increase our accuracy and efficiency in the SOC. And that actually reduces that time to detect from 56 days down to something much more manageable. Whereas as we're seeing threats, and now we're able to pivot and respond to those, especially using a automated workflow.